heard Paul this morning say to the community of Rome. He says to them, "Everyone who calls in the name of the Lord shall be saved." Everyone. Everyone. Everyone who calls on the Lord shall be saved. No exceptions. You believe, you trust in the Lord, done. You're saved. But then he follows up with this. Because remember, in Rome, there's a community of people who are not God-fearers, who don't know God. They don't know of God and of God's promises. So he says to them, "But how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed?" How could you call on somebody you don't believe in? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? You don't know somebody, how do you trust them? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim him? There's nobody talking about the Lord and telling them the good news. How can anybody know about the Lord and of God's promises? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, "How beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news." Ah, that's good news, right? How beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. So yesterday, some of us were at a safety summit in the neighborhood. And we're there with all these people from the neighborhood, from the surrounding neighborhoods that surround St. John's, and we are there hearing one another, getting to know one another, talking about safety and security and what we would like to see in the neighborhood so people can feel safer and feel like this community is a place for everyone. Those who are renters, those who are homeowners, those who have been here 3 days, and those who have been here for 30 years. And those who are unhoused. So it was a mixture of people. We had some people there who live in the community who don't live in traditional homes. They're not housed, but they live here and they're our neighbors. So there's all this conversation, and I was thinking about Paul, and I was thinking about the invitation Paul had to the Romans and the invitation that is for us. How are people to know about God's promises if we don't talk about it, if we don't share the good news? And so how do we do that? So I offer that the best way to share the good news is to live the good news, is to be in a relationship with people in a loving, kind, compassionate way. So that the life that we live, the way we embody the good news, is the way people learn about God's promises. It's the way people know and learn about the good news of Jesus Christ, who cares about every single one of us and wants all of us to have a life filled with joy and peace. And so I think that what Paul is asking us is not just to be talking about Jesus and inviting them to church all the time. That's good. But to be church out there. To be the feet. The happy feet that are out there living the good news. I say, how are you this morning? How are you doing? How's life treating you today? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll keep you in my prayers. Or, I heard this, and maybe you could try this, right? Sometimes we can fix things. Sometimes we can actually do something about the situation, like safety and gathering with the police officers and the city council members and figuring out how we're going to make this a better place. And sometimes there is nothing we can do for that person. There's nothing. It is the situation that it is, and we can't do anything about it. But they don't have to live it alone. They don't have to experience that struggle alone. I've been reading about loneliness from the former Surgeon General. And it is one of the biggest illnesses of our time, loneliness. And it impacts our mental health, and it impacts our physical health. People are feeling more and more disconnected. It's a time in America where there's a greater number of people over 50 who live alone than ever in our country. And I want to be very clear. Living alone does not necessarily equate loneliness. Just like living with a full house or being a part of a lot of people does not necessarily equate connectedness, right? But are we a vehicle to connect people? Are we there with people, listening to them, being with them, and responding to them in a way that reflects the good news? Are we patient with people when they're still kind of set in their ways and they don't want to change? And that's just the way they do it all the time, even if it makes everybody else uncomfortable and kind of creates a little bit of a ruckus. Do we take a breath? Say, yeah, that's just the way they are, and that's okay. I'm going to love on them anyway. Are we patient? Are we kind? Do we forgive when we're hurt, even if it's hard? Do we help people out? Are we generous when we see somebody in need? Right? How are we embodying the good news? The lessons that Jesus has taught us, the lessons that we hear on a Sunday morning. Do we then go out and live that way, right? And in our own way. Every single one of us has our own particular way of how we do that. I was reading a story that Brother David brought to mind, and he talks about this Roman soldier who lets a priest come in to hide in his house. He's not a God-fearer, he's not a Christian, he's a Roman soldier, but he sees this man and provides a place for him to live, to kind of take refuge. And while that priest is there, the priest's way of being, the priest's prayerful life, the way he was, really kind of shook the Roman soldier. And he started asking him some questions about, like, why do you do that? Why do you believe that? And just kind of curiosity, right? But it was nothing that the priest was doing in a very kind of loud way, just kind of being who he was. And so there's a knock on the door a couple of weeks later, and the soldier puts on the robe of the priest and gets arrested. And they go into the tribunal and they discover that he's not the priest, that he's he's a Roman soldier. And so they say to him, go and sacrifice as a good soldier, as a good Roman should. And he says, no, I'm a disciple of Christ now. So he dies. Right? So his conversion goes so deep that he's willing to die for his new faith and for his new life. But what Brother David points out in the story, not only the heroism of the Roman soldier who gave space for somebody and who, when it was willing to die for his faith, but what he wants to pay attention to, that I think is a really good message, is the life of the priest. It's the priest's way of being that helps open up the eyes of the Roman soldier to a new life. In his own quiet way, the Roman now has a new life. So much faith and so much trust that he understands that for him, death, this is not really death. That he has a new life, a new way, right? And so most of us, Brother David points out, we're not likely to sacrifice our lives. Most of us are not going to get a call at the door and we're going to have to give up our lives for being Christians. We live in a country where that's not happening, right? There are other countries in this world that still happens, but most of us won't encounter that kind of choice. However, Brother David points out, is that all of us can inspire people to have a new life, to live a new way, to be curious about God's promises, to be curious about God's ways and Jesus' teachings, right? And so how we live our lives, how we encounter people, how we engage with people can open up people's curiosity about what do you do? Why is it that when I get really frustrated, you don't? Why is it that you seem to come and talk about some challenging things in your life, and yet you talk about it with hope? Why is it that for you, when the storm hits and is wavering and is shaking your boat, you're not afraid to sink? Where is your anchor? Who holds you together? Right? Oh, well, let me tell you a little bit about my life and my story and why I live the way I live, right? And it could open up the possibility of people being curious about a new life. And so when we wonder, is St. John's going to survive? Are going to be around another 5, 10, 50 years? I don't know. Can we do that? I invite you to think about not just how many people are here on Sundays to be the measure of whether we're surviving, but to think about what encounters, what engagements, how are we touching our neighbors and our neighborhood in a way that opens up the possibility for them to have new life, for them to see a transformed world because people follow Jesus' teachings. And so what we do Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday matter. How we go to work and how we show up at people's homes, at dinner parties, at the grocery store matter. How we show up down the street when our neighbor can't get to the mailbox because they had foot surgery, and you see them and you go say, "Don't worry, I got you. Let me get that mail for you." Right? I got you. When the lawn is overgrown in our neighbor, and we say that, it looks like you're having a hard time. Do you mind if I mow the lawn for you? Right? Those connections, those encounters can open up the curiosity of people, and that life, new life in them and in us, can give us that glimpse that Jesus has for all of us. And so, yes, the church is alive and well when we are living, being, and practicing those teachings that Jesus has taught us, because now we're living in a different way. And so as Brother David, I want to close with Brother David because I think we do have the capacity to change that. It says, in our quiet, and for me, maybe not so quiet, steady, unwavering commitment to Jesus Christ may inspire in others a curiosity and a desire to understand and embrace this faith. It is entirely possible that the way we live, the way we speak, the way we serve, the way we love and honor one another and those whom we meet may inspire someone we hardly know to seek God by exploring the Christian way. Amen.
Amen.